The world is changing faster than you can imagine. The old systems are collapsing. Join us as we delve into the minds driving the future, the Clean Titans.
Welcome back to Clean Titans. Today we have Juan Diego. Juan, we spoke a year ago when the EV market in Colombia was still a novelty. Today, you're reporting it has surpassed 10 to 12% market share, the psychological tipping point. As a historian, when you look at these numbers, do you see a tech trend or do you see the beginning of a social revolution in Latin America?
Hi, Sied. Thanks for inviting me back. It's very exciting to be here. And it's also very exciting to see how the Clean Titans channel has grown because I think I was one of the first one there.
You were the first.
Oh, I was the first one there.
So exciting to have you back.
We have seen pretty much exponential growth all over the region. Colombia is one of the fastest growing countries. As you mentioned, we are already over 10%, but I don't think I would call this a social revolution yet. And I say this because of two reasons. First, the vehicle market is electrifying very fast, but the vehicle market in Colombia is very small and is focused on the upper tiers of the society. Only wealthy people buy new cars. When are we going to see a social revolution? When we see the electrification of the motorcycle market? And that's taking a bit longer. What we are seeing is a technology, I wouldn't say trend, this is a technology revolution that's going to reshape the entire way of our economy works. And as such, I will also call it the beginning of economic revolution. We are going to see entire changes on how transportation will provide for energy for the vehicles, how fuels will start declining. That's going to fundamentally reshape our society, but it is not yet a social revolution. For that, we need motorcycles. And those are taking their sweet time to electrify.
Well, maybe with sodium batteries cutting the price in half, that might happen faster now.
I have high hopes for sodium batteries, but I think the problem is not really technological, institutional. Colombia has a very big motorcycle segment. Last year in 2025, we joined the 1 million club, which is we are one of 10 countries in the world to sell over 1 million motorcycles a year.
Nice.
I think we are the least populated country in the world to sell over 1 million motorcycles. Most of those are either built locally or assembled locally, which means there is a lot of inertia, there is a lot of interests there to be protected. Just as we saw in Europe before, the combustion vehicles, they don't really want to let go of them, or as we see today in Japan and the US. I think that's happening in Colombia because if we wanted to, we could already have very cheap LFP packs capable of providing affordable motorcycles. Motorcycles are not going down in price, e-motorcycles, and I think that's the main issue here.
So are there any manufacturers of e-motorcycles in Colombia?
There are a lot of small assembly companies. I don't know if I mentioned this a year ago, but Colombian electrification in the two-wheeler segment is focused on the mopeds. Why? Because they don't have to be registered. They don't have the same restrictions of motorcycles. Motorcycles, for example, have to have PS, brakes. They require some security equipment that mopeds and electric bicycles do not. So you see that all the importers, all the innovation, all the entrepreneurship of the country right now is focused on this micro-mobility segment. And meanwhile, gasoline motorcycles are booming like never before.
You spent years working on land restitution for victims of conflict. How does the fight for zero-emission mobility connect to the fight for land rights and rural development in Colombia?
That's a very interesting question because I believe there are two answers. The general one, let's say the politically correct one, and the radical one that I have been working on for the last few months. So in general, electrification will reduce the overall cost of transport, and it will also provide rural communities with the ability of producing their own fuel. Right now, they have to import the fuel from the cities, which is expensive because transport is expensive, but you put a couple solar panels and then you can charge your motorcycle or your tri-cargo, your three-wheeler to just move around. That's going to reshape rural areas, but it's going to take a while. We have to bring to them the affordable options. They cannot afford an expensive vehicle right now. We have to create local ecosystems, but that's going to reshape how rural people commute, how they work, how they transport the things that they produce. But I did an article on Clean Technica, helped me a friend that's working on coca crops in Colombia. And basically, we calculated that as much as 10, perhaps 13% of all the gasoline used in Colombia is used to refine coca crops into cocaine, which means that all these groups that are operating as illegal mafias in the rural areas, they require access to massive amounts of gasoline. And they require this access to be seamless, to be they cannot have any friction there, because if there is friction, then the economies of the illegal actors start to suffer. So what happens once gasoline is no longer available? Once the cities in these areas start to electrify, gasoline will slowly but surely becomes less available. And right now you can take big truck full of gasoline and take it into the countryside. And we need that for cars, for the motorcycles. But eventually you will not. And once you do not, then this key component on the cocaine trade will fall apart. And I think that's a historic opportunity for the Colombian government to finally get a hold on the situation. This is a simplification because, of course, there are other political actors interested in lands not as means of securing cocaine trade, but as means on themselves. They have been taking land simply because it's profitable to do so. But historically, also, these actors have had armies that are also funded on cocaine. So I think that that's going to be the biggest impact. But for that, we need gasoline to start disappearing from the regions. And unless there is a strong public policy of electrification in these regions, that's going to take 15, 20 years at best.
In Africa, you can displace diesel generators with solar and batteries, and in just 1 year, you get the payback. You get the solar and batteries cost of running the diesel generator back, and then after that, it's just free.
Yeah, I have read that. That's actually pretty impressive. I don't think it's going to work like that in here, because in Colombia, traditionally, rural areas which are not communicated, they are fueled, quote unquote, fueled. They are electrified by micro hydro, like Pelton plants, which are put on the rivers, basically. Which I would guess they are expensive to put there, but once they are there, you just need to maintain them, and they are basically free to operate.
In your articles, you often debunk the myth that EVs are rich country luxury. Why is this myth so persistent, and who benefits from keeping it alive?
Well, it's two things, I think. First, the myth is persistent because we live in a world where the United States has an outsized influence. And if you look at the United States, you see that for many people in there, sadly, electric vehicles are some of a liberal elite coastal fact. Like Tesla was born in California, and of course, now it's not as that. Things are changing fast. Now Elon Musk is on the right, so it's sort of the narrative is not as solid as it was, but those ideas keep momentum. And until only 3-4 years ago, electric cars were so expensive everywhere. Not only here, but everywhere. They were so expensive. So really, they were for rich people. But prices have crashed. They have not come down yet. They are crashing down. Right now in Colombia, we are in many segments, we are seeing EVs already cheaper than ICE EVs. Not only at price, but actually cheaper. The point is, you have this set amount of arguments against EVs, but the price one, which is a very valid one, is over. You see that most poor countries don't care about the others. It's less convenient. Well, it's cheaper. You have to wait. I don't care. It's cheaper. That's how people in poorer countries think. They prioritize economy over comfort, over tradition, over a lot of things. So it's going to be a quickable option because it's cheaper. But on a deeper level, I think that this narrative of EVs being a rich country fad is be a bit dramatic, perhaps. It's the last hope of the oil industry, because we are seeing that growth is, I don't want to say stopping because it's not stopping yet, but its growth is slowing down. Last year, oil demand in the world grew at, I believe it was 900,000 barrels a day. But then we see that last year, China was stockpiling at rates at above 1 million barrels a day, so some sources say, which means effectively, and I believe it was not only in China, but oil storage grew in other regions as well. So that basically means that countries are stocking themselves because oil is cheap, but the real consumption may already be lower than that. So
there was a report that diesel consumption is down in China, and the oil has peaked. Even coal and oil both have peaked in China.
Actually, just prior to this interview, I was reading that MP coal is on the table because coal exports are struggling in this month. And I think we will see more of that, but I don't want to say pessimistic, but perhaps a bit realistic. And it is that many clean tech promoters and, let's say, fans have overestimated the speed of the transition and they had underestimated the inertia. Because you may have 100% EV sales, but you still have a fleet that's gasoline, and that will take a while to go away. So inertia is very strong. So I don't want to make it look like tomorrow we are going to say oil sales collapse. But the thing is, oil has grown for a century now. I think a century and a half of continuous growth. And even if there were periods of, how do you call meseta, flat mountain, periods of flat periods and small valleys, you knew that growth was coming back. And that's no longer true. And the economies of all these new super deep oil, super heavy oil, super complex shale oil reservoirs, they don't really work if oil demand is going to slow down, stop, or even come down. So they need these poor countries. They need to know that these poor countries, once they become richer, they are going to start consuming more oil. So otherwise, they are basically like their economies are no longer going to work in the next decade. And oil is not an investment that you do today for tomorrow. You start investing today in a field that will start producing in 5 years, and you need to know that at least the next 10 or 20 years, you will have that field into production with a profit. And that's no longer given.
In Pakistan, they bought a lot of LNG. They installed 22 gigawatt of solar in the last 2 years. And last month in January, they were selling 7 or 8 LNG full, huge tankers on the open market because they don't need it anymore because people have switched away. They don't need to use all that LNG to make electricity.
Pakistan's style is actually impressive. They are, and it's not a public policy.
It's people, it's
They are
a poor
roots.
country. And it's a poor country. They don't have money, but they're selling their jewelry, they're selling their whatever they can to in the villages. People sell their cows and buy solar panels and get off of diesel generators.
Yep. And I think there are some dramatic cases where you see just explosive growth, but they are telling you how things will come next. Now, 2026, we have been seeing solar panel prices drop. I think 2026 is expected to end this trend for now because China is ending some tax rebates for solar panel producers. So perhaps this year we will not see explosive growth as we saw it last year, but the trend is clear and growth will come back in 2027.
They say what happened in Pakistan might happen in Africa this year.
But the difference is Africa is poorer than Pakistan. So Africa is not consuming a lot of fossil fuels. They are not going to start turning back the ships, but they will simply not grow. And Africa is not a big consumer of fossil fuels already.
True. Let's turn to the 2025 tipping point and the Bolivia model. Talking about the subsidy track, let's talk about your latest piece on Bolivia. They're facing a fuel crisis, yet EV sales are booming. How does a country move from unsustainable gasoline subsidies to stellar electricity independence?
Well, we don't know yet how they will manage it. And I think it's going to be also sort of a grassroots movement. So Bolivia's history is very complex and a bit sad, I think. As many other countries, Bolivia fell in the trap of subsidizing fuel when there were very few cars because they needed. Of course, if you have very few cars and you subsidize fuel, you make things cheaper for everyone because then transport is cheaper, buses are cheaper, trucks are cheaper. But then you get wealthier.
Everything is cheaper then.
And once you get wealthier, more people start buying cars. And once more people are seeing the benefits of very affordable fuels, it becomes harder and harder for you to just cut it out. So they started trying to cut these subsidies out as early as 1997, if I'm not mistaken. And again, they failed. And then Evo Morales, who was president of Bolivia for a very long time, he made some constitutional changes and he made a referendum and he basically put the idea that the gas and the oil of the Bolivian reservoirs should be for the people. The people should directly benefit for it instead of a few private companies, which meant the subsidies were now legally stronger, so to say. And then the commodity boom ended, investment fell, production started to fall, and suddenly Bolivia was having to use the gas they were exporting to pay for the fuel they had to import. And then they couldn't do that anymore. So they burned through the total of their foreign reserves doing that. And now basically it's the time of the reckoning. They no longer have money to pay for fuel, so they stopped fuel and there was a fuel scarcity. And what does it mean? That people starting choosing EVs simply because they worked. It may not have fuel, but you still have gas in Bolivia. They are still gas exporters, so they still have gas to provide their own electricity. So I don't think we will see in Bolivia this rush to solar panels as we see, for example, in Pakistan, because Bolivia is still a gas producer. But I do think that Bolivia will slowly electrify, will rapidly electrify its fleet, and then will slowly pivot to alternative solution as gas start to falter. Because gas is limited, it's not a renewable resource, you eventually run out of reserves. It's happening all over many countries, including mine. So basically you have to look for alternatives. But for now, Bolivia remains with electricity independence, thanks to gas, which means they can pivot to EVs. And the new government has sent subsidies for fuel, which means there is a further incentive to get an EV because now fuel is more expensive.
And Bolivia is a big producer of lithium. So they got lithium right there for the batteries.
That's true. I'm sorry. But I was checking the other day Bolivia's exports. Lithium makes only a very small part of the total.
So it needs to be developed. They have a lot of reserves. So if they're not developed, then that means.
But the thing is, lithium is not going to replace oil or gas because a car will require tons of oil, 20 tons, 30 tons through 20 years. A car will require, 10 kilograms of lithium. So volume size is just a much smaller business. Bolivia needs to reinvent its economy. And lithium is going to be a big part of it, but it cannot be the whole of it. You cannot replace a fossil fuel, which people are burning in immense quantities because you need to burn it and then buy more and burn it, with a resource like lithium, which you use 10 kilograms of it for a car and then it lasts you basically forever because modern recycling is getting 99% recovery rate.
Right. And lithium, you don't use up lithium like you use fossil fuels. You use them once and then they're done. Lithium is an element, so it never gets done. It can always be recycled into newer batteries, which are more efficient, so require even less lithium and last longer.
So I think lithium makes more of a psychological argument, and Bolivia does have its own locally very small car company, but it's more psychological. So we have it, we have to use it. It's not really an economic alternative for the country right now, and I don't think it will ever be.
Well, the thing that's really a benefit is the current account defense. You've argued that for poor countries, EVs are a tool for protecting the current account because they swap imported gasoline for local electrons. Can you walk us through the math of that transition for a country like Colombia?
Yeah, actually, I was looking at the data not long ago. So, okay, I'm going to be some rough numbers. Colombia, its peak, produced around 1 million barrels a day of oil. It then went down to 800,000. I think we are now a bit below 750,000, somewhere around that. And we consume around half of that, so around 400,000 barrels of oil a day, which means half is for exports. Our oil reserves are not very good. We are not Venezuela. Our oil is very cheap to extract, but we don't have much of it. So we are sort of an anti-Venezuela because Venezuela has a lot of oil, huge reserves, but they are very expensive to develop. Our reserves are very cheap to develop. There are just very few of them. And the result is that unless oil prices get up again to 80, 90, $100 a barrel, you're not going to see Colombia ever increase its production again. It's going to be going down all the time, struggling to keep up. Oil demand was going up, but it should stabilize soon. And out of these 400,000 or so barrels that I told you, over 300,000 are for either gasoline or diesel. So basically, 3/4 of our oil consumption can be electrified with EVs. We have a 20 million vehicle fleet, of which 6 million something are cars and trucks, and then 14 million something are motorcycles. So quick math. 20 million to 300,000 barrels a day means that once we replace 1 million, let's say 2 million of those vehicles, we should be seeing around 30,000 less barrels being consumed. Right now, we are not yet there, but we will get there. And what we are going to see is that at some point, I expect that the rate that consumption is going down will overcome the rate at which oil production is going down. And once that happens, oil will again begin to be a growing commodity we can export even if production is going down. And that's what happens with every country. If they import oil, it's even better because they stop spending money immediately. Now the Colombian fleet right now is at 50,000 EVs. So it's going to take us a while to get to that 2 million, but it's going to happen. And once it happens, we will see that perhaps Colombian oil exports will once again start growing in volume, even if our net production is going down.
But right now, there's a huge glut of oil on the market.
Well, I don't know. You never really know because all the indicators are so shady.
But China and India both are pivoting away from fossil fuels. They want their own energy because they don't have it. And so the expected demand from China and India, which are massive countries, is not going to come.
India is not going to grow, but I wouldn't say that India is pivoting away yet because you see China. Let's take China as our best example because China is huge. It's grown so fast. It has driven oil demand for over 2 decades. But it's still like we only started seeing oil demand falter when China was nearing 50% EV sales. So India is right now at, I think, over 50% in three-wheelers, but in cars and motorcycles, it's still low. So we need to see India go. And China, I don't know how China motorcycle sales work, but I believe that China motorcycles are mostly electric by now as well. So probably India will keep growing, just not as fast until they reach around 50% EV sales. And that's going to be 4 or 5 years from now, perhaps sooner, I hope. But I bet.
Well, there was a report that the Indian Supreme Court has banned or is planning to ban all gasoline diesel vehicles in cities like Delhi where smog is a big problem. So they by decree they have to electrify everything. Big cities.
That would be an amazing policy. It would speed up the process. But still, India is not yet moving away from oil. That I think will happen around 2028, 2029, perhaps 2030. Until then, remember what I was talking about, this inertia still strong. And another big problem that we have globally is the US, because the US was pivoting away from oil and then it's going back to oil. EV sales have faltered. They are in this culture is strong.
But in the US, the elections happen every 2 years for Congress and every 4 years for president, and things can change 180 degrees with a new election.
That's true, and I hope they do. I hope that we see again a big push for electrification because the US has a lot of potential as a consumer of oil to reduce demand.
But despite of everything that is happening in the last year, the demand for electrification is proceeding forward. The demand for electric vehicles is proceeding. Even in Texas, the amount of wind, solar, and battery plants are going up.
That's completely true. No, and I really hope that we saw EV sales in the US falter after the subsidies ended, but I really expect that there will be a recovery in 2026. And if that happens, then I may be wrong and US oil demand will keep flat, perhaps go down, because the US is already developed. A lot of developing countries should also see flat demand. So if China starts going down, Europe is going down.
But I don't know if you got to see this video I made about robo-taxis. Robo-taxis have the potential of decreasing the number of, America has 400 million vehicles, and all you need is 25 million robo-taxis to take care of everybody's need. So robo-taxis can not only, they're all electric, they can not only decrease the demand for gasoline and diesel, but they can also reduce the total number of vehicles on the road.
Even if people start leaving the car at home, it's just as good. I think that we will know exactly what goes on in a whole years.
You can go see Zoom Robotaxi that they started in Las Vegas. Amazon has killed a lot of industries, and they could kill the entire auto industry. They could transform how we move around and how packages move around. They have plans for 100,000 electric delivery vehicles. They already have 25,000 on the fleet now.
That's impressive, yes.
And then they're making these little pods that can deliver things to you for the last mile, as well as
seen those ones,
move
like
people.
The small things that go.
I was there in Las Vegas on the day they started, and I got to ride in an Amazon Zoom pod on day one of their debut in Las Vegas last September.
Oh, that's so cool. I'm more pessimistic than anything here. It's just that I feel that the US is a good example of how the inertia works. because I'm talking about inertia.
True.
And you see Europe, and Europe still has a lot of inertia, but they are hyper-regulated. They have these very strict emissions caps. They have been giving a little to the automakers. But
I just saw that in Europe, the electric vehicles outsell gas vehicles now. I think last month.
Europe's going fast, but my point is, even Europe, which is in theory advancing fast, you see oil demand go down slightly, not a lot. So really, you need to do a push China to see quick changes. And that's only happening in a handful of countries. So globally, oil will remain strong for a while longer. But it's a matter of compounding. It starts slow. Then once EVs reach 40, 50, 60% of the global sales, you will start seeing what we are seeing in China, but only in the world.
Let's turn back to Colombia. We are seeing a Tesla tsunami coming to Colombia, but BYD is already there. How does the competition between China and the US play out on the streets of Bogota?
We don't know yet. That's something that I'm very excited about. So basically, Colombia provides monthly registrations. We just got January's numbers. They were very good. We are 10% EV market share in January. Normally, January is a slow month, which means we can expect EV market share to grow. But in January, there were only 13 Tesla registrations. So this tells me two things. Either Tesla is not going to be as important as I thought, but I don't think. I think that what we are seeing is that Tesla is pointing to one part of the market, and then you have Chinese brands pointing to another part of the market. So you have these people who don't like Tesla for whatever reason. I know of one person that did not buy the Model Y and instead preferring the more expensive and smaller BYD Yuan Plus, because the BYD Yuan Plus is taller. It has a higher road, but it's taller. So if you take a pothole, which we are full of, then you are risking less damage to the car. If you will look at numbers alone, like the Tesla Model Y, it's the BYD Yuan Plus. It's bigger, it's more powerful, it has the same range, and it's cheaper. But yet people are still buying the BYD Yuan Plus. So either they don't like Tesla, but I don't think they don't like Tesla. I think when Teslas start arriving in numbers in February, we're going to see a fundamental change of the market, and I hope that it's going to be a permanent one. But are we talking 5%, 10%? I don't know yet.
So are those all new Teslas, or secondhand Teslas are also arriving?
You cannot import secondhand cars in Colombia. You can, but not on big numbers. It has to be your personal car. So
I see. Let's turn to ZEMO and the Observatory. As an expert for the ZEMO Observatory, you're tracking the whole continent. Who is the real leader of 25? We always talk about Chile and Uruguay, but is there a dark horse country we're not watching?
I would say we have to define leader in some way, and then we can find who the leader is, because I believe there are 4 countries who arguably can be considered leaders. So first, you have Bolivia. I have no idea what's going on in Bolivia. Every week, I spend at least an hour looking at local media, trying to find out if there is any data whatsoever. We do know that vehicle sales in Bolivia keep going down. They were 30,000 in 2024. They were 24,000 in 2025. And we know that Chinese brands are entering in full force. We know that there are very affordable EVs in Bolivia. We don't know how many of them are being sold. So right now, we are wondering, is Bolivia 5%, 10%, 20%? We have no idea. But Bolivia has the potential to become a very quick leader, just as Ethiopia or Nepal, like these countries where EVs just absorb the market. But we are yet to see that. Bolivia will be the dark horse in your analogy. And then we have another 3. So Uruguay, the obvious choice, massive growth, over 20% market share growth. They have not yet published data for January 2026, so we are still waiting to see how they are going to enter this year, because I want to see if they keep very strong growth or if they are going to perhaps level a bit, as Costa Rica did. Costa Rica was the undisputable leader in 2024, and then in 2025 it grew 9%. Not bad, but not enough to keep the leadership. Then you have Chile. Chile is going lower than I expected. It's a country without oil reserves. It has a lot of money, so it can import oil, but still, they could get rid of those oil imports. And it's a country with a lot of very efficient deployment of solar power. And still, EV sales are not as high, but e-bus sales, those are booming. So Chile has the only region in the country with a 100% bus fleet, electric bus fleet, which is Copiapó. Electric buses made up over 30% of total bus sales in the country last year. And this is very important because every bus that you sell displaces way more fossil fuels than every car. So just for that, I believe they deserve a mention. And if the trend continues this year, they could become the first Latin American country where you actually see diesel demand start to level. Because right now we are focused on gasoline demand, which is the one the big passenger vehicles use. But diesel, I believe, is more important. And Chile is also getting experience on something that's heavy vehicle use, which will be more important in the future as we try to electrify trucks. And they may also get a lead there if things keep going the way they are going. And then the last one that I want to mention is Brazil, because Brazil is very big. It has the biggest industry in South America, not in Latin America because Mexico's is bigger. And it's also the biggest vehicle market in Latin America. So Brazil is extremely important and it's growing very fast. We know that a country like Costa Rica or Uruguay or even Colombia, which are small ones, they can pivot fast, they move fast. Bigger countries you expect to grow much slower. Look at Germany in Europe. Like it cannot grow as Denmark or as Norway. Brazil is growing very fast, 50%, 60% a year. And they have a lot of local production. And they do provide data for January 2025, at least for purely electric vehicles, like battery electric vehicles. And they are 5% battery electric vehicle, 4.8. And traditionally, they'll sell more plug-in hybrids. So that means that Brazil probably started 2026 above the 10% EV market share, which is
Nice.
important. And they are doing this thanks to locally produced BYDs, locally produced Great Wall Motors, and then GAC is going to start producing soon. Chery is already producing, it's going to start producing EVs. So I think Brazil is the leader because not only it sells more than everybody else combined, probably, but it's pivoting in what matters the most, which is local industry.
The Paraguay-Uruguay paradox. A year ago, we asked why Paraguay, with its abundant hydroelectric power, couldn't keep up with Uruguay. Has that changed in 25? Or is policy still lagging behind the physics of the grid?
Paraguay is a mystery. I always say that Paraguay is a country nobody really knows a lot about. It's a hard country to find information into. And it's also a mystery because it's the only small country in Latin America which prefers plug-in hybrids over battery electric vehicles. You see Colombia, you see Uruguay, you see Costa Rica, Chile. Everybody prefers battery electric vehicles. In some cases, massively so. 90% of EVs are BEVs and then 10% are plug-in hybrids. Not Paraguay, they have more plug-in hybrids than battery electric vehicles, and they are growing very fast. But they are still way behind Uruguay, and because Uruguay is based upon battery electric vehicles, they are further behind than it would look like. But they are growing fast, they are already at over 5% market share. And what I think it's going on is that whereas Uruguay is more of an international country, a coastal country which directly negotiate with China, Paraguay is an inland country. So to get to Paraguay, you have to go through Argentina or Brazil. And to get to Paraguayan ports, you have to go through Argentina in the. So my proposition to understand this is that Paraguay still has a heavy influence from Argentina and Brazil. And Brazil in particular is very fond of plug-in hybrids, so Paraguay getting its dynamics from these two bigger countries, whereas Uruguay is acting independently because it has direct access to the seas and it does what it wants without any influence from its neighbors.
Even though Paraguay has massive electricity from their hydro dam on the big waterfall. But do you think this is because of Paraguay's huge relationship with Taiwan and Japan, and as Japan and their auto industry is not promoting electric vehicles and they're really promoting hybrids, and because of the conflict between Taiwan and China, so Paraguay is closer to Taiwan, and so they're not pursuing electrification, even though it's to their detriment because they have to import all their fuel. So it's bad for them. They got free electricity. If they electrify, then they can benefit from their current account deficit would improve. Their money won't go out of the country. They'll stay in the country so they could grow faster and bring better well-being for their people if they electrify fast.
I think that's a very good hypothesis. I wouldn't think it's true because of two reasons. First, let's look at Argentina. You have Javier Milei in Argentina, this extreme right, libertarian, crazy guy with the chainsaw. And what's he doing? He's, of course, all the way up in the US. He's best friends with Scott Bessent, whatever. He's still doing a lot of business with China. And Argentina's EV market is booming from a very small base, but booming right now. And where are those cars coming from? China. Because I think South America, and particularly the southern part of South America, like Peru and Brazil, and everything, the south of that, they aren't really these countries which have a lot of, they put economy above diplomacy. So even if Paraguay is an ally of Taiwan and Japan, they will go for whatever suits them best. And second, Japan is promoting hybrids, but not plug-in hybrids. And I think that's a very big mistake on Japan's part. I think they should have been the leaders in plug-in hybrids, and that would have made Japan's industry very relevant in this moment. But they are not. The Chinese are the leaders because the Japanese got stuck on the simple hybrid concept, and they are not going beyond that. So you see that the plug-in hybrids arriving in Paraguay are Chinese. So really, it's China still that's dominating. It's only that Paraguay, unlike all other smaller countries in the region, is selecting Chinese plug-in hybrids instead of Chinese battery electric vehicles.
Japan is making a big mistake, and I think a lot of their legacy car companies are going to go away. Nissan, this year, their debt is down to junk bond status. They're selling their plants, they're closing factories, they're laying off people, and they don't have any money to update their products, so they're in big trouble.
Nissan and Mitsubishi, but Nissan is the most precarious one. And Japan had everything. They were the world leaders in hybrid technology. And even if they don't like EVs for whatever reason, I don't agree, but they have their reasons. They could still live in the plug-in hybrid segment.
But Nissan was one of the first companies to come out with the EV Leaf, but they didn't capitalize on it.
That's true. They had the Nissan Leaf. I don't know what happened there. I think the Nissan Leaf perhaps was more of a European imposed thing with Carlos Ghosn. I don't know how you pronounce that. And I was going to ask you, because this is something that I have heard, but I'm not sure if it's true, that, for example, you have the Toyota Prius and then you have the Toyota Prius Prime, which is the plug-in hybrid. And I have read that if you want to buy the Prime, you have to wait a lot of time because they are never ready, but the Prius, the normal Prius is ready. Is that true? Because I think the Japanese are sort of shooting on their own foot on this one, if that's true.
And now with the electric cars so good and batteries so good, there's absolutely no need to have two powertrains in a vehicle. There's no need to lug around two powertrains in the same vehicles. I think the day of hybrids is gone. It's over. It's history. We don't need hybrids anymore.
I agree with that. I still think that plug-in hybrids will remain important as a cultural middle ground, but it's cultural. It's not technical. Perhaps infrastructure will make them more relevant in some markets, or the lack of infrastructure. But it's more of a cultural thing. People don't want to let go, but so they will buy a plug-in hybrid and they will keep it, and then they will change for an EV.
I bought a Tesla Model 3 long-range dual motor in 2018, and I took a trip from across the country, from East Coast, Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean. And I went to Montreal, Canada, and to Badlands in South Dakota. I never had any issue charging. That was 7-8 years ago. And people today, I went to long trips last year, and people still today ask me, did you find charging stations everywhere? I said, every place you stop, there's a charging station almost. And usually you have to stop for restroom break far before your battery runs out.
That's even with the very high speeds that you guys travel at in the US, because here in Colombia, you don't really have to have a lot of stations. Still, there's going to be more of a problem in poorer countries because none of us is really putting any government money on that. So it's going to be slower.
I stopped in Lost Hill, California. How many chargers they have there? 168 V4 superchargers in one location. And what's even more remarkable? There is no wire. There's no grid connection. They have massive solar farm and massive batteries. The solar charges the batteries and the batteries charge the cars at V4 speeds, they even have chargers for semi-trucks there.
That's incredibly impressive.
And then you would think that Texas is the oil country, right? I stop at a Buc-ee's, which is a very popular gas station. They have all kinds of knickknacks, artifacts. They have these signature brisket sandwiches that Texans love. and they have roasted nuts and all kinds of desserts and things. So people like to stop there when they're traveling. Stop at this Buc-ee's in Temple, Texas, along I-35. How many chargers were there? Like this one gas station?
20, 50? I don't have an idea.
78, 10 Mercedes, 18 Tesla V4, and 50 Tesla V3 superchargers. One location in Texas.
That's impressive. I think the biggest charging station right now here in Colombia has like 10 charging points or something like that.
But the first time that I saw a very large number of chargers was stopped in Baker, California, just as you enter California from Las Vegas. And they had, I don't know, I think maybe 80 or 100 chargers or some number, very large number, all solar canopies and chargers underneath it. It was amazing. It was a spectacle. And then I went to Hollywood, California at the Tesla diner, and they have 80 chargers there. And they have these big, massive screens. You can watch movies on the screens. And right in your car, you can order food and they'll deliver it to your car from the diner. Or you can go upstairs to the roof and sit and watch the movies and eat food. And they serve the food in these cardboard containers that look like Cybertrucks. You can watch a video on my channel. I made a video about that.
It sounds very cool.
So, and Tesla is planning more of those diners around the country. If that one is successful, they hope to do more. Well, let's turn back to Latin America. What is the coordination gap between Latin American governments and that China is successfully exploiting?
What do you mean by coordination gap in this sense? I'm not sure. Can you explain the question a bit?
Well, coordinating between the countries so that they can have their own supply chain, their own manufacturing, rather than relying on Chinese imports.
I don't think there is a coordination gap, honestly. I think basically 3 industrial zones, which is Mexico, Mercosur, which is Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and the rest. And there has never been any coordination between these 3 because all of us sort of do our own thing. And there was not going to be any coordination. Whatever happens, each of us is on its own. So basically, Mexico right now is in a very difficult spot because they have to deal with Trump. So they impose tariffs on China, but they also don't want to see their own industry falter because they make a lot of cars. But they are going to still feel a lot of pain because of the tariffs to the US. So I don't know what they're going to do. And I think in the south, in Brazil, has a very strong policy of welcoming Chinese investment. So we are going to buy your EVs, but you have to come build them here. And the rest
they're big enough that they can do that, right?
Yeah, and the rest of us are simply, we are going to follow on Brazil's lead eventually. Argentina right now is welcoming Chinese EVs as well. I think there will be some investment in Argentina because they also have a very big industry, but it will take a bit longer. And then everybody else, there has never been any coordination. So it's not like China is exploiting, it's just that China is selling cheaper than you can locally produce. So they are going to take the market regardless. But I don't see it in a political way because we have never had a strong union that you can see fracturing. It's just the way we have always been.
Let's do a deep dive on modes of transport. The 2 and the 3-wheelers, which are the most important part in most of the world. In many Latin cities, the real transition isn't in cars, it's in the last mile. What is the state of electric 3-wheelers and delivery vans in 25 in Latin America?
That's a very hard question. So you just mentioned ZEMO just a moment ago. So perhaps some people don't know what that is. We have been working on a zero emission observatory for Latin America. ZEMO is funded and spearheaded by an European company, which is also in charge of the European Alternative Fuel Observatory, which is EAFO. And in ZEMO, we are trying to follow this. And it's very hard because we don't have any hard data on imports on anything. So it's very hard to know exactly what's going on, particularly in the smaller, poorer markets, which are the ones that are going to be most affected by this. So basically, I'm going to speak about Bogota because Bogota is something that I can see and analyze simply by going out. But I'm not sure that you can extrapolate from Bogota to the rest of the region. So be a bit, let's say, skeptic of this as a general trend. But what we are seeing in Bogota is a massive increase on 2-wheeler sales. So the mopeds, the very small motorcycles that are not really motorcycles, but also bicycles. These are literally everywhere. I don't think, I am speaking literally, I don't think you can walk more than 5 or 6 blocks without finding a store for one of these things. There is one literally a couple blocks from my house, and you see them everywhere. They are everywhere in the city. They are everywhere. Some of them go in the street, some of them go in the bike lanes. They are not supposed to, but they do. And I think are making a difference. We are also seeing booming motorcycle sales. So they are not taking from the motorcycle sales. They are taking from public transportation. People choose them over public transportation because they allow you to not be stuck in traffic. What I think is happening is that we are seeing a lot of these 2 and 3 wheelers pop up everywhere, but they are so hard to measure. We are not really sure how much oil are they displacing. We are not really sure who is using them. Are people going from the bike to the electric bike, or from the bus to the electric bike, or from the car to the electric bike? We don't know that yet. And that's what we want to work on next. In ZEMO, we have the data of the cars because the cars are easy. They are registered, so you get the data. But this is the things that we want to look at next, because as you mentioned, and as I also mentioned before, is here that the revolution is really going to happen in these countries. Micromobility, urban mobility, of course, cars are important. Of course, buses are important, but in here is that you can make the most impact, probably for the most people. So Bogota has something is that it's not very big a city. It's very populated, but it's not very extensive. It's very dense. So things are not really far away one from another. So these are not last mile vehicles. These are total mile vehicles that you use them for the net amount of the transportation that you have. So you go to a bigger city, which is much more extensive. For example, Mexico City, Rio, Sao Paulo, even Buenos Aires. I don't think you're going to see that. I think people in there will not prefer these means of transportation because the distances are bigger. So you sort of have to deal with more possible problems in your way. But I think they are going to be very big in medium-sized cities. And regarding vans, they are still not very big. You see that electric vans are becoming important in the cities where you have traffic restrictions for combustion vehicles. So Bogota, Mexico City, Santiago, a few more, but those are the ones because you have a business asset and you want to make it work every day of the week. You don't want to park it 1, 2, 3 days a week. But in the rest of the country, I think still people prefer combustion vans, even though electric ones are already at price parity. I think this is, once again, we go back to the matter of inertia. This is some cultural inertia here. And I think we are going to see rapid changes, but we are not yet there yet. Only in the cities that are big and that have traffic restrictions for combustion vehicles.
The heavy duty wall. We see electric buses in Bogota and Santiago leading the world outside of China. But what about the semi-trucks and the maritime ferries? In 2026, the year we see the first electric heavy haul routes in the Andes.
Sadly, no.
In
Okay,
China,
so-
they sold 225,000 semi-trucks last year.
I'm going to mention China because I think China points to the future. But let's talk about ferries because do you know the biggest electric ferry is going to start operating this year between Montevideo and Buenos Aires? The China Zorrilla.
The one that came from New Zealand, right?
Basically, they are trying it right now. It's going to start operations very soon. We don't know yet. Economically, I don't think it's going to be cheaper. I think it's going to be slightly more expensive, all things considered. But the mere fact that they are doing it means that we are at a point where you can do it. Even if it costs a bit less, a bit more, sorry, you can do it. Maritime transportation is not very common in my country, and therefore I don't know a lot about it. I don't expect maritime vessels to electrify very fast. I think they will be very economy focused. So I'm not going to enter in that area because I think that's going to be one of the laggard parts of the transition. So it's going to be the latest things. A lot of people have very old boats. They just change the motor. So you need to make an electric motor that you can fit on the place where you used to fit the gasoline or diesel motor. And it's going to be complex. Of course, it's going to happen, but I'm not very bullish there. But trucks, China, it took them a while to grow EV sales. Even if they have been very fast, they were, 2, 3% in 2019, and then 4, and then 8, and then 16, and then 25, and then 32, and then 37. And then electric trucks, it's like 8, 28. And they were at 50% last December. And what I think it's happening is that passenger cars are moving the economies ahead. So people don't only buy a passenger car because it's the cheapest way to move around, because if that was the case, they would not buy a car. They would buy a bicycle or a motorcycle, or they would take the bus. It's a matter of personality, it's a matter of identity, it's a matter of comfort. There are a lot of things that you have into account there. But trucks, they are commercial vehicles and they are meant to make a profit. So either the economies work or they don't. And I think what's happening in China is that we went from the economies don't work to the economies do work, because suddenly there was a tipping point and the tipping point was passed. And as a result, electric truck sales are absolutely exploding. And I have no idea how this year is going to be, but if we keep the trends from last year, we could be close to 80 or 90% at the end of 2026. I think that's also going to happen in our countries. I think there will be a point when electric trucks become affordable enough and companies just switch like this. We are not there yet. And I don't think 2026 is going to be the year. I hope 2028 could be the year. Even 2027, it's a bit optimistic to me.
How does a battery as a service model change the math for a small business owner in a developing nation?
To be completely honest, I think it doesn't, because small business owners are by nature conservative and they do not want to let go of the control on their products. I don't think a lot of small business owners are going to take advantage of the battery as a service. And I don't know why, but anytime X as a service comes up in Latin America, in Colombia, I have been seeing prices in Colombia, in Chile, in Mexico, I think, it's always expensive. For example, you can do renting for your car, which basically means you don't pay for the car. It's not even leasing. You just rent it for a couple of years. And I have done the math over and over and over, and it's never good enough. So to say I'm saving some money, it's just a matter of comfort. You don't want to deal with going to the mechanic or anything, but really it's more expensive. And I think that happens because interest rates in Latin America and in developing countries in general are high. They are very high. So that means capital is more expensive. So that means if you're going to offer battery as a service, you have to account not only for the cost of the battery, but of the cost of the capital of the battery that's sitting there and that you would otherwise be making a profit on in whatever other company you have. And once you account for that, battery as a service becomes more expensive. And I think not a lot of business owners are going to go with it. And the other thing is batteries are getting cheaper so fast that it's like at this point we have EVs here in Colombia that are cheaper than the comparable EV cars. So batteries are cheap enough that I think the owners are just going to prefer, no, I rather purchase it by myself and own it, and then not risk it that next year they're going to ramp up the price. Inflation is high in these countries. Okay, inflation is not like runaway inflation, but we are at 5 point something in Colombia. So you buy the battery now, it's going to depreciate, but you buy the battery as a service, and then next year you have to pay more. So I think because of all these factors, it's not going to be as important as we can see it being in China, Europe, or the US or Canada.
I'm soon going to interview the CEO of this company in Australia where they swap out these large batteries for long haul semi trucks. So you just go in, they swap it out, and you're good to go. You don't own the batteries, they own the batteries, they provide you a service.
For trucks, I do see a business case being made, but it's mainly because of the swapping, because you don't spend time recharging. So to be fair, yeah, that's somewhere I see it working. But we have to wait to see if there is some standardization, because if all batteries are different, you need to have a network of stations. And as far as I know, nobody right now is working on that in the region.
I'm going to put you on the spot for a prediction. You mentioned that adopting is promising to accelerate in 2026. If we sit down a year from now, what is the headline you expect to be writing for Clean Technica?
So we closed Latin America, and by Latin America, 13 countries that we have data on Latin America for 2025. We closed in the fourth quarter at 6.6% market share, more or less 50-50. I think it was 55% battery electric vehicles, 55% plug-in hybrids. Not bad, still far too hybrid focused for my taste. I would much rather prefer something like 5% battery electric vehicles and then 1 point something plug-in hybrid, but it is what it is. My hopes are that by quarter four, or by at least the last month or the last couple months or 2026, we are going to get close or perhaps even reach 10%. That's my expectation. I think we can manage to do it because I think most factors are pointing in the right direction. So, as I mentioned, Brazil, I'm very bullish about Brazil. They are doing things very good. And as local production increases, local adoption will increase as well. Then you have Argentina. Argentina has been the worst laggard for a very long time. I remember the times when they were below 0.1%. So there were basically no EVs at all in the country. And then suddenly in January, you see 620% increase. So of course, it's from a very low base, but you can see the sort of exponential growth that you expect from a country with very low adoption. Argentina is a very big market. So we have 6 million vehicles in Latin America. To get to 10%, we have to get to 600,000. Argentinian market is a 500,000 market. So if they manage to get to, I don't know, 2 3%, that's 10, 15,000 extra EVs that we did not have last year. And then, of course, Brazil is the Titanic one in here. Chile has just started imposing emissions rules, just as the EU, as the European Union. So Chile will have also increases based upon policies. And then you have the myriad of smaller markets, which are doing well. Colombia has everything for an explosion. Sadly, Colombia does not have a lot of cars, so it's not going to make as big a difference on the net. But we ended 2025 at 30,000. And I honestly believe that we can double that in 2026. I honestly believe that because of Tesla, cheap prices. And then you have other companies bringing down prices or bringing down cheaper cars to compete with Tesla. So we are in the midst of a price war. I don't think that combustion cars are going to be able to keep up with this price war. So I think they're going to remain more expensive, and that's going to turn the tides. What is the problem here, and what is the reason that I may be wrong? Mexico is imposing tariffs on EVs for Chinese cars in 2026. Mexico has not yet developed local EV production at any meaningful scale. They have a public project for Olinea, which is supposed to be an affordable mass market car. It is delayed. And therefore, local media in Mexico says, you know what? The Chinese companies, they can simply absorb the tariffs because their profits are so big, they can simply shorten them and keep prices. We don't know that yet. But even if that's true, that means that prices are not going to come down in Mexico this year. And that's bad because, of course, you need prices to come down continuously so that the market keeps the momentum. Mexico is also a very big market, 1.4, 1.5 million units a year. Very big, very important. If they keep their current market share or even increase it a bit, I'm optimistic. But if market share in Mexico falls because, for example, prices go up, then that could completely derail my prediction. But so long as Mexico behaves, so to say, I hope that we can end 2026, not all of 2026, but the last months of 2026 at 10%.
You have balanced a career in human rights and energy transition. For the young professional in the global south watching this, do you have to choose between social justice and technology?
Mostly no. Arguably, there are a few very specific cases where you may, but mostly no, because you can do things right. So let me pull up an example, which I think is a very good example. In Colombia, you have this massive wind potential. It's massive in Colombia's northern peninsula, because it's a peninsula which basically sits in the middle of the sea with no mountains. So there is wind all the time, west to east. It's very strong wind. It's very consistent. And so let me make a quick 10 gigawatts capacity on wind power in that peninsula would basically provide 50% of Colombia's electricity.
Wow.
More or less. It's huge potential.
Oh, no. I realize that nowadays windmills are so big and so powerful that one windmill can take care of a small city needs.
Did you see that wind farm in Ireland where they are taking down the wind farm to make a new one? And each of the individual new windmills are going to provide more energy than the entire farm did.
Exactly. The windmills are getting so big and so powerful now.
So basically you have this, but this is a very poor, forgotten region. It's a majority indigenous region from an indigenous group called the Wayuu in Colombia. If you're interested in them, there is a movie called Birds of Passage, I think. Very good movie to get to meet them. And you can also see the region, because you can see how the region is and you can see why there is so much wind there. These people are poor. These people are forgotten by the government. And now we want to go use their land. So they have opposed, of course. But the new government, the leftist government in Colombia, after a long time of delays, honestly, I expected more. I expected them to be up to this task as soon as they got into power. Now it took them 2-3 years, and they solved it by providing, we are going to produce a lot of electricity here. It's going to bring us a lot of money, a lot of resources. So let's give back to the community. It's not even expensive. You're going to have this huge, invest in a couple substations so that you can provide hyper affordable power, then give them electric bicycles and electric mini trucks to move around. And you're basically creating hyper resilient communities in the middle of the desert and bringing super efficient solutions for these communities. But if you just want to go use their land and then leave, of course, there's going to be opposition. I think because the new clean technologies are by nature decentralized and because they are by nature like scattered, it's very easy to invest just a bit more in the infrastructure that allows local communities to profit from them. And if you do that, then the local community is going to go from an enemy, from an adversary to an ally. What's the only exception? Mining is complex. Mining is sort of the elephant in the room. Mining is never good for the environment. Mining is always heavy on the communities that it is imposed upon, but it has to be done. And in there, well, you have to find local solutions. There is a copper producing town in Colombia. It's called Carmen de Atrato in northern Colombia. I was there a couple of years ago. It's very well managed. People do not complain about the mine, at least most people do not, because they have done things sort of well. But still, there's going to be an environmental impact. There's going to be some affected people. Mining is never good, but the point is that if we transition to clean technologies, we are going to have so much less mining because we are going to require so much less fossil fuels that I think on the grand scheme of things is worth it, but you do need to make arrangements so that the communities do not feel left behind and are not badly affected.
And the mining for electrification, you only do once because you can keep reusing its elements and they don't disappear like fossil fuels. So you only have to do it once and then you can just keep recycling them.
But that matters in the global scheme of things. But if you are
the local environment, right?
You don't really see a difference because the lithium is going to keep producing.
Now we come to our closing question. Juan Diego, if you could take the fuel subsidies money from every LATAM government and put it into one specific stellar project, what would it be?
I have two answers, and one of them is sort of cheating, because there is one thing that I really have high hopes for, and is long-distance electric planes, long and medium-distance electric planes. And if we develop that, we solve the problems of a lot of regions and this in the mountains, because infrastructure is very expensive, it's very hard to build, it's very hard to maintain when it rains as much as it rains here. And if you can simply fly over it, then you solve a lot of issues. And electric planes by nature are going to be very cheap to operate, and they are going to be very optimal at low and medium distances. So they are going to be ideal for this. But I understand this is not the question, because this is not really something that you can just invest and get. You need to have a lot of things into place. You need to have very cheap batteries, high density batteries, all those things. So I think the thing that matters the most right now is a connecting infrastructure, tissue that makes renewables possible and that makes electric vehicles not only viable, but comfortable, practical, is infrastructure. And that's something that the government has to invest. But unlike fuel subsidies, which you pay and pay and pay, you invest on these ones, and then you make a good, how do you call that? A good financing scheme out of it, and it should pay for itself. It should be something that you only have to pay once. And build these connective lines from Guajira to the center of Colombia, you get all the other electricity. You build these substations in the region, you get affordable electricity for the people there. You build the charging stations for the cars near solar panel farms, you get cheap electricity to recharge electric trucks that are traveling through the country. You build the substations inside the cities, then you get the ability to deploy charging infrastructure within the cities, not only outside. So basically, the wind farms, not the solar farms, not the EVs, because those are coming by themselves, but the connective tissue that allows them to thrive. Because right now they are viable solutions, but if they become comfortable and practical solutions, then adoption is going to rise up so much faster. And for that,
there's a company in LA that has a big solar panel on a lamppost with batteries inside the lamppost and a charger. So you don't need a lot of infrastructure because you can just put that lamppost anywhere and you got an EV charger because it's got its own batteries, its own solar, and its own connection.
For example, here in Colombia, we are very dependent on hydroelectricity, and that's perfect for solar because that means that we are guaranteed, if we have a lot of solar, that we are going to get surpluses of electricity during droughts. which are very dangerous for us because there is no water, there is no electricity. But because of that, we cannot really, we have very long rain periods where there is very low sun intensity. So we still need to have everything connected because we rely on the solar panels when there is no water, but we need to rely on the water when there is a rainy season. And for that, we still need the connective tissue.
Right. And I think China is building massive high voltage lines in Brazil
Both of them, and also Chile.
and also Chile. Yeah.
Because
Any plans in anywhere else in LATAM?
not yet. I know that there is some interconnections planned right now between Colombia and Panama, but I don't think those ones are high voltage. I think that's still a bit away. Hopefully, it will not be that long.
Well, Juan, thank you so much. We'll do this again in a year.
No, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I think a lot has happened in this year because we have now very more complete article Technica that I'm sure you have read some of them. And we also have the Observatory. We have ZEMO. ZEMO was not existing a year ago. Now we have it. You should check it out. It has a lot of countries. And that one is going to keep improving. We are going to work to use it as a benchmark. So we are going to use it to compare countries. So Colombia is doing better than Chile. What's the reason? What's the public policies? What's the taxes? What's the prices? What's the factors that are dynamizing this? And we really hope that it's going to become a way for Latin America to start working together, but also a source of information for other countries, other developing nations that are interested in doing things, but they don't really want to try and miss and then try again. They want to get what's the best recipe. Well, we are going to find out and we are going to give it to you. And I will be telling you everything that we are doing so that you may be able to perhaps comment on it if you find it interesting.
Thank you. I look forward to it. Good luck.
Thank you. And thank you for the invitation again. Hopefully, we will be meeting next year with even better news than this year. And I will be very excited to see.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it right now.
The insights and solutions we discuss here are crucial for a cleaner future. They're about a fundamental shift in mindset. We believe that interviews like this are so profound, they can change the course of your life. If this conversation moved you, hit that subscribe button to join the community that's building the sustainable future. Thank you for watching. Like and tell your friends about Clean Titans and consider supporting us on Buy Me a Coffee. And we'll see you next time on Clean Titans.